Hey, welcome to the Kingdoms Podcast. My name is Luke and I host this with my buddy Matt Ma. And our goal is to empower you to discover how your faith impacts culture for God's kingdom. To do that, we're sitting down with different men and women from all kinds of disciplines to uncover how they, through their ambitions and vocational skill set, make a difference in the lives of those around them. And so if this is helpful to you, we'd love it if you could like it, share it, and subscribe. In the meantime, enjoy today's episode. Well, hey everybody, thank you for being with us on the Kingdoms Podcast. And Karen, thank you for making time to be with us today.
Thank you, Luke. It's wonderful to be here.
Well, joining us from all the way from Alaska with the moose antlers in the background, if you're watching this on video, just to prove it.
Honor of our friends, hospitality, and great vibrant lives.
A lifestyle that hopefully I'll have the chance to, be exposed to a little bit more, because I think I have no idea what it's like in safe, cozy Ontario. The biggest threat we have would be raccoons. So, but that's it's a cool element to have. But also, Karen, for some of the people jumping in and listening who may not know, I'm really grateful to have the chance to talk with you because of your work in missions and also humanitarian aid alongside your husband, Dave, with the Free Burma Rangers, which might be a name people recognize either from hearing Dave be interviewed on outlets like CNN or also the documentary that came out for FBR a little bit ago back in 2020. But before we dive into those things, I would love to give you the chance to share a little bit about your own story, your own journey into this calling, maybe going back, about 30 years or so, give or take, when you first met Dave, to unpack what your life was like before you met him, the career you were in, but also what led you to say, you know what, choosing to marry Dave is going to lead into this incredible, adventurous, dangerous life of missions and humanitarian work. So take us up to that point in your story.
Well, I feel extremely grateful that the Lord blessed me with faith and joy in knowing him from an early age. And so I was one of those kids that accepted Jesus when I was 5 with my parents and went through church life, really thankful and feeling part of that community. And at a certain point, I felt I wanted to be a teacher and I wanted to teach kids with learning disabilities in the public schools. And I thought that was the best use of my interest and abilities. So I never even considered anything overseas. About the time I started my first job, I had a perfect career or position, first time teaching position in a Seattle area school. Wow. And yet I'd met Dave and I realized that my heart was conflicted. So Dave was the first person I met that was such a committed man of God. He prayed about everything all the time. And I wanted to live my life with him. I didn't quite know what that looked like. He sort of mentioned things about missions. And I said, I've never even thought about what a missionary did, even though I was a leader in youth group and a leader in the church. I was so focused on America that I said, I don't know what missionaries do. I'm not a doctor or a translator. Those are my only categories for missionaries. Okay. So what would I do? And he said, people just want to see if you live your life any differently as a Christian. Do you handle your personal problems differently? Do you handle your family problems differently? How do you just live out a day-to-day life with Jesus? And I thought, oh, well, I guess I could do that. And so I also realized, that perfect job I had didn't consume all of me. And I knew that if I had, if I could walk away from it, that it wouldn't be a loss. And that way I was walking towards something that God was offering me. And when you talk about that exciting, dangerous, scary, adventurous life, I really had no idea what that was. I knew Dave was super intense, but I didn't, and yet I knew that he was an amazing man of God. I did have some questions, maybe normal things like, are we going to have anything to talk about over breakfast? I love your faith, but do we like the same movies? Do we like the same music? All that. And talk about Jesus every single second. So I did find myself, really thinking at the same time, I felt God say, this is the best thing I have for you. And it'll be a very rich life and I will be with you. Wow. And I wanted most of what that looked like, even not knowing what it was. I just wasn't sure I could morph myself into that person. So I just decided, to take the jump. And it came with the call. Dave talks about having a call to the WA people. He had decided he was going to, he's in seminary and going to pursue missions. And then a request came via his dad to go to this unreached people group in northern Burma. And he felt it was for him. And I had kind of a long-term dating plan several years down the road. And all of a sudden he was leaving. And I felt God say, the time is ripe. You know enough. If you let this wait too long, it could get rotten. I don't know how to describe that feeling I had. It's like, don't just ponder on something forever. Could you just decide? It doesn't have to be yes or no. So anyway, and then I thought, I can't live without this, even not knowing what this was. So we said yes. We had a 2-month engagement. We got married and went over to Burma. And I also felt, as far as practically, what would I do? There are kids all over the world. I thought, I'll figure something out. Which is interesting, because I think our vocations, if God has put in you some kind of a very solid vocational purpose, not everybody has that. Some people just sort of do something most practical to get to another point of giving in ministry. But if you have had that calling, I'm a soldier, I'm a teacher, I'm an engineer, whatever, that never leaves. Even though you offer it to God in the sense of missions, I will put you first and do whatever that looks like, you still have that craving to go back and say, I'm really great at this one thing, God. If you could just make this one scenario work out, I would look like an all-star. And I think Dave has felt that as a soldier, and I have felt that as a teacher. When we were in Chiang Mai, I spent a lot of time making friends with teachers at the international school, really investing my time saying, okay, this is it. And I felt God say, it's not. You need to be open to go back to the jungle with those kids and those people. Do not tailor make your ministry. If you said you're willing to do anything, you really have to be open to anything. And so it's always been a bit of a struggle. So I just say that to people who wonder, what does it look like when I put my vocation on an altar? It really is on the altar. Like, it's out of your reach in a lot of ways. And yet God will do more with you and for you than you could ever do on your own, which is the proper posture in front of Jesus anyway. That we're waiting and we're indebted and we're receiving. We're not, we don't have the reins. So that was 30 years ago. We said yes, we went over and gave it a shot. And I honestly was so excited. I'll just always also say this. I have, young people in my life that on the brink of that relationship, or wondering, is this person the right person? I had struggled back and forth. What does this look like? Who is Dave? I don't really know him that well. You meet somebody for 1.5 years. How do you know them that well? Fair. And yet he said, do you want to marry me or not? One night. Wow. He's just listening to me, kind of, I don't know, just being a girl or what, like, well, I like this, but I don't like this, And he finally just said, do you want to do this or not? And I said, well, I do. I know I don't want to live without you. Give me a night to think on it. So I woke up the next morning and it was as if there were blue skies. And I was like, I did it. I made that jump. I decided for the thing that I deeply wanted to do. And I do think we need to give ourselves time to wait on those big decisions, just see how it fits and to see what your spirit comes up with. But at the same time, when it's right, wow, I've never felt such confirmation. And just like that, from a cloudy sky to blue sky, but you couldn't know until you did that. So anyway, there you go, 30 years ago.
Wow. And beautiful. Yeah, beautiful what you unpacked there, because that putting everything on the altar is terrifying and exhilarating all at once. But your story is one that points to God doing incredible things. And I wonder, to maybe give like the 50,000 foot perspective, like since Free Burma Rangers was started in the 90s, this is for listeners who are tuning in and saying like this sounds fascinating, Karen. Like, what have you been doing? What are some of the countries and contexts and conflicts, just from a 50,000 foot view, that you've served it?
Okay. So, Dave did have a vision, and I'll just back up a teeny bit. He came out of the army and then offered that up in seminary, that God would do what he wanted. So I always say, here's a soldier with a missionary heart, and what does God do with that? About that same time in Burma, there were heavy conflicts in the ethnic regions. And so the Burma army was pushing through a Karen area, which is an ethnic group in Burma. as they did other areas as well. But because that was close to where we were living, then we were invited by pastors to go to those villages in Burma to minister. He would say, people don't want to come to my village. It's too dangerous. It's too scary. You have to walk all night. You have to walk through Burma Army lines. You have to go up and down all these mountains. And he just felt, Lord, you're using all the things I love for this ministry. Yes, I want to go. And so out of that came young men and women who also had that same heart. They were already doing some of those things, but they needed just a little bit more relationship and capacity. And Dave offered that out of his experience in the military before. And so it really was what you might say tailor-made in some situations. And so I was happy to follow along. And so that was the Burma scene, which represented so many different ethnic groups that were in conflict from the regime at that time. 50,000 feet means a few years later, we were invited by other friends to go to what you would call a cross-border situation in Sudan, meaning that recently after the Sudan split, North and South Sudan, there was an ethnic group of people who were attacked and displaced. And so we were able to go to just the southern part of Northern Sudan to share some of those ideas of service. And I was a little discouraged at that point because I was on a roll in our work in Burma, and I had ideas and plans, and all of a sudden Dave said, nope, we need to go to another place and help there. And I was like, what? And yet I felt God sort of set me aside and had a talk and said, Karen, it's like a tripod, you know. In every conflict situation, you've got obviously the military, but then you've got an advocacy community. Those are the ones that are doing, like yourself, the podcast or the newspapers or the TV or the reporting. And then you have a faith community, and it could be various faiths, but they're all three there in this conflict situation. But the faith community is not doing advocacy and they're not fighting. And the advocacy community is not doing faith and they're not fighting. And the soldiers are certainly not doing faith or advocacy. And I felt God say, Dave has a vision for all three. And in supporting the civilian population, you know, you have the military that has their mission to do, and you come as a humanitarian worker in that environment where you're not afraid. You're not fighting, but you're not afraid. You're willing to do advocacy. You're willing to put a light on it. And then you're willing to do faith. You're willing to pray with people and really build up the soul, because that's really the eternal part. When we listen to, you shall not perish, you shall not die, in the verses of God's promises, I think many of us have a little click that says, but we do die and we do perish. And so there's a different equation. And I think it has much more to do with the soul. And so getting the faith in there into each of these experiences means something has got to be empowered to survive no matter what physical conflict is happening. And yet we are still in the world. And so we do need our relationships, get the news out there, help each other. And yet, if you are comfortable going into that place where families are still living in active fighting, that's your ministry right there. So after that Sudan trip, it was a few years later that ISIS was the big threat in the Middle East. And we were invited to Kurdistan, northern Iraq, to help with that situation with communities that were suffering from those attacks. And then from Kurdistan, it was into Iraq proper, as ISIS was pushed south through Mosul, back through Mosul. And then kind of overflow through that was Syria. So I guess those would be the countries that we've been involved in and are still involved in as far as border conflicts in the Middle East. We haven't been to Sudan in many years, but we still have relationships with people there. So most recently too, I guess this exact time last year, when the Afghan situation really blew up.
Escalated, yes.
We had visited friends, mission friends there years and years ago. I don't know if you remember, there was a community that came to Chiang Mai.
Yes.
Okay, so we stayed in friendship with some of those people and visited them just for fun many years ago. And so all of a sudden, when Afghanistan erupted, some of those friends said, hey, what can you do? Is there any option for helping?
Wow.
We did think about migration of people across borders. So we went to Tajikistan to see, will there be an opportunity for us to help? And that situation proved very different, where the borders were very closed, but we still have relationships with local people who are very effective, because every border, you know, is just ethnic people who know each other in different families and communities, and they can do so much more than we can do. So we can encourage and help them with that current situation that's still ongoing a bit. Yeah.
So you could say, which incredible work, whether it's Africa or the Middle East or Southeast Asia, for listeners listening, you could say your real focus has been on internally displaced peoples.
Yep.
Is that fair to say? Yeah. In multiple continents around the world. Wow.
Right.
So,
yeah. Refugees are ones that stay in their own country and then, or go to a different country. I just got that messed up. And then internally displaced are ones that choose to stay in their own country, hoping to go back home as soon as possible. And right.
Yeah. Well, and the thing that's so compelling about your journey in the ministry that you're a part of is that, I mean, you listed Sudan, you listed Mosul, which was like, if I'm remembering right, you were there right as ISIS was kind of being extinguished in that area, but you're interacting with people who have been under that oppression for years. Then obviously your work in Afghanistan, and human nature tends towards comfort and away from discomfort. Not to mention ruthless opposition or oppression or even violent conflict. And those are the kind of context that you and your family are intentionally entering into. Can you speak to why? Like, what motivates that heart set to say, oh, wow, this is going down in Afghanistan, we're going to get as close as we can, or this is going down in Mosul, we're going to get as close as we can? What motivates your heart to serve in that way?
Well, I think it would actually go back those 30 years when Dave and I shared our visions and dreams, and that first mission call, first to the Wa people and then later to the border conflict in Burma. And to see how that was such a place for his skill set to be given. And it was such a natural outpouring of ministry for him. And I had earlier felt God say, Dave has the vision in this relation. He has the vision in this ministry right now. We want to support this. It was almost as if God and I had to talk about job descriptions and said, this is a support position. And I love supporting you. You let the other person be up front, and you can enable all these great things and be so productive and feel purposeful behind that. And so, yes, I would love to support that vision. So that vision has been evolving as opportunities come up for Dave. It really, you follow the need of the people in that situation, but clearly it's in conflict situations, because him having a soldier's heart, he's looking to help people right in the middle of that sort of really crazy, dangerous environment. But he has a way to see through it. Any kind of a soldier who loves it is going to be able to weave it apart and find, where am I going to be effective here, and how am I going to help here? So when you ask, why do we go to those crazy places? I mean, I ask the same thing. Why are we going there again? But when you follow that vision of all the ways God has miraculously used his skills, then yes, it's obvious that that's our office. So, that can be one thing, but of course it's me, and you can't just live on someone else's calling the whole time. But we develop relationships. If you think back in those early days in Burma, all of a sudden we're making relationships with people who have young families too. And I'm really making relationships with children. And you see, there actually are families living in this conflict situation. They're not getting shot at 24/7. We have dinner, we eat, we go to church, we go here and there. So you really do live a life with them. And then it became natural for us to bring our kids. And even more so, I felt God say, Karen, in this environment, I am going to teach your kids things you do not know how to teach. And, 4 things is hospitality. The people there offered us so much hospitality continually, just so open. Generosity, take everything we have, use everything of ours. There's nothing that's owned exclusively by us. Simplicity, here's a river, take a bath. Here's some vegetables in the forest, go pick them and cook them. Living that life with what God has given you so immediately. And then the last one is compassion, where I find it for my kids is laying down your life for someone. And it's that calling to lay down your life. I feel just because God calls you to do that, you don't lay it down you don't lose it every time you lay it down. I feel like I've done that many, many times, thinking, oh my gosh, this is so bad. And yet you walk away from it. God says, hey, we're all still here. That's awesome. But you went through that sacrifice, that offering of laying it down to what you thought you were out of control. And people from our teams in Burma do that as a mission. They say, I want to serve my people. I want to go where it's hard and serve. I want to go in the worst environment and help. So I felt early days, God saying, your children will learn so much from this experience. And so even though my friends would say, it's dangerous, or my parents, this is awful, what are you doing? They didn't really say that. They were very supportive. But I would say there's so much good we're going to get out of this. If we survive this, we're going to come out really good.
God's going to do great things in us, and we trust through us. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. And I just felt like, Lord, you're right. I want to put my kids in the situation where their souls are built up. I don't know my last day. I don't know their last day. I want to get you as fit for heaven as I can, not knowing what the future has. And if it means putting you in the hands of these very loving people, even though the outside is rough, then I would do that.
Yeah.
So that's the calling.
Yeah. Wow. There's so much you've said, and there's so much more to that, but thank you for highlighting that. And I wonder, because you touched on this earlier in the first question, when you talked about your work and wanting to be a teacher and working with kids before getting married to Dave and joining him on this adventure, that you've in a way found a way to do that, to pursue that calling to serve kids, especially in your work in various parts of the world. And I mean, where I live in Canada, there's a place called Good Life Fitness. So not wanting to confuse us with Good Life Fitness, but I know you've launched the Good Life Club. And would love for you to walk us through, what does it look like for you to reach a village, or maybe even just reach a temporary site where people who have been internally displaced, and it's not just like, oh, we got to move. It's like, for listeners, like, it's like our village got blown up and doesn't exist anymore. Our house is gone. So we're living literally in a jungle or a cave or somewhere. So you're in those contexts. What does it look like to show up, enter that village or camp, and then to host the Good Life Club with the children and with the families there?
There's so many facets to it. And often I just feel like a stick in a river, that there's just this current of God's goodness that is going. And I am doing a little bit, but mostly I'm just going with the flow. And I'll share all these things and hope that the listeners will continue to see them as prayer points also. Prayers for not only the children that we're ministering to, but the rangers that are putting on the program. So years ago, I was in front of a group of kids in this village that was very threatened, and everybody was very afraid. And the kids sort of sat before me, but they just looked so desperate. And I was praying in my heart, Lord, what do I do? I want to take all these kids home and fix their lives. And I felt like I really can't even take one kid home. And I felt Jesus say, you're right. You can't fix it, but I can. Introduce them to me and I will give them abundant life. And so there's a lot of questions that raises how, when, but I felt Jesus say, that's it. You introduce them to me. That is your job, Karen. And on one hand, going back to that conversation about vocation, it's super sweet when God does give you a one-liner that says, you just do this, please just focus on this, keep it simple. And so how to do that then kind of came out a couple different ideas where it developed into abundant life for body and soul. And it was, how can we put on a program that would be like a substitute teacher showing up to do an assembly for kids? Because if it's a difficult situation, parents need to be cooking, gathering wood, gathering water, getting the roof fixed for leaks, all these practical things. And I thought, what can I do that would just keep kids busy for a day? Because I know that would be helpful. And at the same time, like I said, if it was my last day, if it was their last day, what's the important thing to teach? As a teacher, you can teach anything. Right. And have fun doing it. But what is the most important thing to leave with them? And then that would be child evangelism, that God has a plan for your life. He is bigger than the situation, and he will lead you and guide you. And then as far as healthcare goes, that you as kids are competent to take care of yourself and help your parents. Even if you do a little bit of hygiene, you can prevent sickness that will help everybody in the long run. So that goes from, like you say, a very devastating situation where everything has been blown up, all the way to villages that are on the mend and they're doing well and economy is getting better. And we're in that situation at a certain point too, years ago. And I thought, what does Good Life Club have to say here? And it was interesting with the Good Samaritan story, how that comes out of Leviticus, actually, when God is outlining all of the steps he would give to communities. It's almost like he has a plan for foreign policy saying, do this to strangers, do this to the locals, do this with your leaders, do this with your neighbors. So God can give us plans for healthy communities, as well as comforting in grief and trauma as well.
Mm.
So practically speaking, we walk into a village and we have a team of rangers. I have shared my heart back at our training camp to say, please leave more faith, hope, and love in the village than when you got there.
Yeah.
My faith comes from a relationship with Jesus, and I invite all of you to seek that out as well. And I share that most earnestly, hoping that they really will seek that. Many are not Christian because Burma is not a predominantly Christian culture, but many different ethnic groups have. So it's a mix. It's a great mix. And yet everybody is there to sacrifice. Everybody wants to lay down their life for their people. That's the common denominator. And so what a heart God has to use. It's made up of a lot of guys, young guys, 18 to 25, 27, and a number of girls as well. And usually these guys, if they're willing to enter our program, are pretty passionate and committed individuals. They're not afraid. They're ready to go. They're ready to do the hard thing, and women the same way. And so a certain percentage are quite animated, and they can put on a good kids program also. If you give, a bunch of hardy guys a task of being up in front and being goofy, whoa, I have never seen such comedians in all my life. But they're supposed to introduce who they are and where they came from, what duty they have in the team, just to give those students, those families an idea. There are video, there's medic, there's security, there's the kids counselor. There's so many things that you're learning to build capacity in your own future vocationally. And then we are all part of a big Burma. There are many ethnic groups represented here that you may not have ever seen before, or you may have had prejudices against, you may have had history of conflict with, but these need to be your brothers and sisters if you're going to move on to being a whole and well country. And then there's songs, kids always need to be singing songs, and we're singing a lot of praise songs in Karen and Burmese, and praise songs with lots of action. So camp fun songs, get the kids moving. We have skits, we have a drama, like a spiritual drama, we have a healthcare drama. We want to give them snacks in the middle of the day. After the spiritual drama, one of the things that's most important to me are these bracelets, which is a child evangelism fellowship tool. And they're the 5 colors that tell the gospel story. Yeah. And I say gold, black, red, white, green. Every part of that is a series we go through even daily, where God made the world good. You start off good. Evil is it's the darkness. It's the darkness in our heart is that black color. And it's not just at us, it's within us as well. And the red is Jesus' love, the only one that can really fight that darkness. And the white, purity and peace and forgiveness. And the green is new life. We need to have a practice resurrection mindset every day. And we leave that with kids. I wanted to leave every kid I met with a gift, but it's hard when you have that in your backpack. So you can carry 2,000 beads in your backpack a lot better than any other gift. Yeah. And then at the end of the day, we are thankful to be able to give out shirts and gifts for teachers and gifts for the schools and the churches. And so that's the whole day. And then we'll move on to another village and do that same thing another day. Oh, games. There's lots of games and sports and fun stuff like that too. So that's what many churches and individuals have been helping us with throughout the year. And it really is a place where the communities can feel like life continues to be good despite the evil that's going on. They have a place of joy and fun. And I'll just tell you one quick story that had to do with our last mission in June. And this is just a couple months ago. Yes. And we had been in a village we've been in a hide site where the people were still really close to their village that was at that time occupied by Burma Army. And this hide site was actually within shelling range of that area. So everybody was a bit nervous. Even our rangers, who were tough guys, they kind of knew the precariousness and they were a bit nervous. But they knew the drill. This is how we start the program, and we just go in. And there were a few kids gathered. Most were afraid to join. They didn't want to be a target for an attack by an airstrike or a drone. Yeah. More and more kind of came. But as the song started going, kids are always game for attention, and little kids don't necessarily understand the real gravity. So they start singing and dancing, and then these guys up front, they love the attention too. So they start getting more animated. And then a few adults who have gathered, they start dancing along. And then the rangers get even more comical, and their skits take these, and pretty soon everybody is howling with laughter. And I look around, I kind of step back, And that verse came to me, perfect love casts out fear.
Yes.
And I saw that this love between the Rangers and the crowd was just building on itself. And it was like being pushed up and pushed up. So by the end of our program, yes, kind of the gravity settled back down and everybody knew, right, we're still in this bad situation. But there had been a strengthening, like an infusing of courage, of encouraging that God is always with them, to guide them, to comfort them, and to wreck them. And even our Rangers, some of whom are just learning about Jesus and understanding that, said, wow, that was great. We made people happy. All of our fear was gone. Wow, I'm not tired. I can make people happy all day long. It's just they had never been given the opportunity to do that kind of witness about, you know, and it's true. It's almost, you can almost taste it, that love was doing something very measurably profound in that situation.
Yes. Yeah.
So that was an amazing insight and experience that we just had. Yeah.
And thank you for sharing that story. And it's so compelling for me to realize it's often in those spaces when we are most aware of our need or the risk around us that the reality of living out the gospel becomes most potent and precious to us.
Yeah.
So thank you. You kind of answered my next question about hope in what you just shared there. Just in saying, yeah, in those instances, how do you bring hope to people who are navigating some of the most hopeless realities? Anything you'd add on the front of hope before I continue? You nailed it. Perfect.
You know, it is pretty hopeless. And I find myself faltering many, many times. You can't live on a quick one-liners. That's for darn sure. You have to be genuine about what is real and what's not real in a situation that's just so devastating. And yet God is there, and being Emmanuel, at least being there, you're like, this is what Jesus does. He just shows up, and he doesn't necessarily have great, you know, sermons to give, but he's just there because we can't stop the airplanes. We can't stop the bombing. We can't stop the shelling. And some people don't make it. And so what do you say? And even here in all of our lives, I just lost a great friend to cancer a few months ago.
No,
and
I'm sorry.
I was one of 3. And so anyway, I feel like just showing up and saying God still is real. And I think the most important thing, Luke, you and I, our friends, we can do is to keep each other close to Jesus every day. You just never know what's coming out of left field to knock you off your block one day. So to be vigilant in that discipleship and reminding each other we're not alone.
The beautiful gift of being with. Well said. Well said. Well, Karen, if someone were to say to you way back 30 years ago, when you were first thinking about saying yes to Life with Dave, and which evolved into the work of FBR, that they said, hey, you'll be a part of training 300 plus relief teams who will carry out over 1,000 missions and serve 500,000 medical patients, and ultimately provide support to over 1.5 million people from everywhere from Kachin State in Burma to Mosul in Iraq. What would you have said? What would you have been thinking? Like,
wow. Yeah, that's beyond my vision and scope. That's beyond anything I ever imagined, which I think is, again, a good posture in front of God. Just like, make me into more than I can ever imagine, and let it be to your glory.
Yeah, amen. Like it says, like what Paul says in Ephesians 3, right? To him who's able to do abundantly more than we could ask or imagine. Yeah, I came across that stat earlier this week and just was like, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, Karen, to pivot with you a little bit in our conversation, I'd love just to invite your insights into what it looks like for people listening to say, okay, we've heard some of Karen's story, gotten a snapshot into what her life has looked like and her own process of the daunting but courageous and good decision to say yes, like yes to God. And so when we look at the West, and I was listening to a podcast on this earlier this week, but the West it's known for big churches, you know, Christian educational centers, big universities, all manner of Christian resources, which is great. But what is statistically evident is that things like evangelism and community outreach are in really sharp decline. It would almost seem like for many churches in the West or many Christ followers, that hasn't become a priority, just inviting people to have a personal relationship with Jesus and to live for him. And so for someone who is living a lot of your life outside of North America and maybe coming back and observing that, first, why do you think that is? Why do you think it can be easy in the West to maybe lose sight of that? But also, what would you say is a really good thing that needs to grow or change in Western Christian culture, so that Christians are saying really more intentionally and developing that skill set of saying, how can I live on mission wherever God calls me and wherever God has placed me, whether it's in North America or somewhere else around the world?
Mm. Well, I know, when you talk about the church and the trials, joys and trials of the church, it's been happening forever. I'm reading a book now about early Christians all the way till now, and there are just phases of exuberance and quietness or deadness,
Mm,
and yet I know when I look at myself, left to my own devices, I can be very shallow and very narrow. And so it's only with God's help that I am able to do anything beyond my own human ability.
mm,
And I feel like we all need to be putting ourselves, when we learn to follow Jesus and obey him, like want to know him and obey him,
mm.
we offer ourselves to be really stretched. And in my life, that's
Yes.
exhausting when I constantly feel I'm laying down my life for people, or in these missions where it's just hard. I feel I'm stretched and exhausted. And yet I know that's when God can use me. I know that
Mm,
there's a lot of talk about taking care of yourself and making sure yourself is okay. And I think that's important. But I definitely am not the extrovert in the family. I
mm,
naturally by default just kind of go in
mm,
and would take care of myself very well.
mm,
But I know that by stepping out, there is a vitality. Every time I reach out, I can
mm,
measurably see how that brings me more life. So there is something to going beyond that, taking care of yourself and really reaching out and within balance of whatever you're able. And I
mm,
honestly cannot, my husband has got so much competency. Dave has just got this amazing scope. And so I
mm,
can't compare. You never compare yourself with other people too. Theodore Roosevelt said, comparison is the thief of joy, right?
mm,
So I pray, Lord, whatever you bring to my front doorstep, let me
mm.
do with all my heart. And so
Yeah.
I can't get out there to everybody, but if you bring it to the front doorstep, please help me not walk away. Help me be
Yeah.
my best self at that moment.
Mm,
And then I think, as far as mission, like I said, God uses every single vocation for
mm,
ministry. And I think as
mhm,
humans on this earth, we have to serve each other in various ways through our vocations. And I also felt early that our ministry is not, it doesn't have to be to the whole world out there. It's to the people that understand what happened that day that was a miracle. So often
mm,
the people you work with that say, wow, it was not supposed to happen that way. Did you see how that happened? It could
mm,
be anything. It could be plumbing. It could be investment banking. It could be web design. It could be
mm,
teaching or medicine. Somebody there is going to say, that was a miracle. We all saw it, didn't we? That was
mm,
incredible.
mm,
And again, that's where God reaches out to you and to share what you've seen and how you experience him. And so I think maybe just because I never saw myself as a cross-cultural missionary, I always feel like mission does start close. And then as you're able to spread it, and as God calls you to take that to another culture, then yes, you're doing mission work. But boy, we are doing it right here and now. And it's right around us. So I think being global, the church is in a place that I never even knew about way back when, and
mm,
it's kind of surpassing. But there's ministry all the time. I'm one that doesn't criticize social media. I think communication is just the way we communicate.
mm,
We all criticize things that are new once you get about 50 years old. And so I think it's a tool. And I
mm,
think every form of communication is Jesus's way of spreading light and love, and you're never going to be without attack. But that's
mm,
the deal. It's a workout. And I think
mm,
life is a workout. As if there were no sin in the world, there would never be a workout.
mm.
So it starts with ourselves, and it starts with giving us the energy to stay in our lane as what purpose filled in Jesus way as we can.
Yeah. Amen to that. Well, and with that, maybe to touch on that, in that, the work of FBR is very demanding. You've witnessed great suffering. You've endured great difficulty at times in serving oppressed people. You've navigated personal illness. You've lost teammates that you love in the ministry that you've done, in the humanitarian work you've been a part of. So that workout you mentioned, it's like, it, you've lived it, like it's no joke. And yet you and Dave are two of the most purpose-filled, joyful Christ followers that I've had the privilege to personally know. And so I wonder if you could just double click on that for a second and say, this is how, or want to know how your experiences of living in that vein of self-giving love, of readiness to lay down your life. How have you discovered in that a purpose and joy that really God alone can give?
Well, I know, left again to my own devices, that it would be a very different self-destructive life. And
Mm,
I realized early on that I cannot direct my own future to the betterment of myself or others. And
mm,
so that was, I guess I came to that conviction before I met Dave, in a
mm,
way. And
mm.
that said, when I offer it up, look what you gave me. You gave me a chance to live beyond my own human ability.
Yeah.
So there is the opportunity. When we seek Jesus, he provides ways for us to know him better. And then when we obey him, it usually leads us outside of ourselves to
Yes.
a challenging situation that involves humanity, because
Mm,
he could have stayed in heaven, but he came down to be with us. And so
mm,
clearly that was the example that we're supposed to be in community, which,
mm,
is a big like wrestle for all of us introverts. It's like, oh, really have to go out there. But that was his idea. He came, and so should we. And then
mm,
you take that. I take the discipline of devotions every morning, which is a discipline.
mm,
I mean, I'm very easy to eat a good breakfast, but sitting down and having your devotions quietly, sometimes that's more of a discipline. And so
mm,
the soul takes more effort than the body
mm,
a lot of times. But then given that we can live that whole day, whether it's just going shopping and doing all the normal things you need to do,
mm,
or whether it's doing something exhilarating, skydiving or something awesome, where God gives you the opportunity
mm,
to, again, live beyond yourself, sharing in thanks everything he's done for you, and then leading people into that opportunity also. Because when they're thankful, you have to give thanks to something beyond yourself, even if it
mm,
starts there. And
mm,
that's what our friends in these mission environments, the Karen, the Kachin, our friends in Kurdistan, in Iraq, you find the most desperate people giving thanks just for the
mm,
life, just for the little things. And it's an inspirational, how should you say, fellowship, just joining together. It's
mm.
inspiring when you have stepped into what God has for you, when you have
Yeah.
stepped into his will, he brings that fulfilling at the end of each day.
Yeah. And it's an interesting, an apologetic question for another time, but the human desire to be thankful and give thanks.
Mm.
Where does that come from, especially when pointing people to the living God? But thank you for sharing that. And as we kind of wrap up our time together, Karen, I wonder, for the people that are listening, some people they're in a space where they're confident, God's called me here, he's planted me here, and they're working to be missional there, and that's great. But for some people that are listening and they're maybe experiencing a God-given restlessness,
Mm.
that restlessness that comes when the Holy Spirit is really challenging us, to step out of our comfort zone, maybe to step into new relationship, maybe to even pursue a new vocation, ultimately to be a part of God's kingdom purposes in the world. What would be your word of encouragement or maybe challenge to those people who know that Holy Spirit restlessness right now in their hearts?
Yeah. I think it goes back to that idea we should all be restless, because you
Mm,
should be content with the state of the world. I'm not even talking politics or anything. I'm just talking about sin in your own life.
mhm,
Anytime that there, and I feel like I talked about the beads, the black bead comes up, kind of rears
mm,
its head every hour of the day, and
mm,
move on quickly to the red, get over quickly to the red bead, which is Jesus' love. But I do think that living in this fallen world, I've always felt restless, and
mm,
not necessarily very purposeful about that. I haven't necessarily put my finger on what I'm supposed to do about it. Uh, and yet, I think God does give us that through our vocation, through our relationships, through sharing our restlessness, that
mm,
it's that God-shaped hole or God-shaped spot in everybody's heart that wants something better. And one of the gifts in the ministry we have to share with kids is, you're right, the situation is not good, it's not right. I
mm.
always, I had this kind of concept: step into chaos but don't settle for it. Step
Yes.
into a bad place, but it doesn't mean the bad place becomes status quo.
Mm,
Always have the memory of what goodness is and try to get back there.
mm,
uh, and so I believe God uses our restlessness, our pain, our suffering
mm,
for his purpose. And at the same time, doesn't want us to be lazy about it.
Mm, yeah. Well, Karen, you've shared so much already, and I'm super grateful for your insights right through this whole conversation. But for people who are saying, hey, we want to learn more about this ministry, we want to connect with FBR, we want to support them or pray for them, or just discover the work that they're doing around the world, where could people learn more about you and that work?
Thank you. There's a website, freeburmarangers.org, and
Mm,
we have an amazing team and that
mm,
puts all of that information out there, volunteer staff
mm,
for so many years. So that's a gift. And then in various social media platforms. So I'm amazed at the relationships we have all over the world of people who pray,
mm,
constantly sending emails and words of encouragement and words of
mm,
comfort and solace, and
mm,
grief shared is divided and a joy shared is multiplied. And
mm.
so we have definitely felt that. You yourself, you are so thoughtful, have so many great questions, and I know you're leading so many people in your own community towards further steps of faith. So
Hmm. Well,
thank you.
I pray for that. Well, thank you for your kindness, Karen. It's really kind of you to say that. And yeah, thank you for those great points of contact you've mentioned to people. And I would add, yeah, on Facebook or Instagram, look up Free Burma Rangers. And Karen, if I'm not mistaken, that is the documentary that came out on Amazon Prime in 2020 called Free Burma Rangers.
Yes.
Yes. So listeners, there's an amazing documentary highlighting the work in Burma, in Mosul as well, called Free Burma Rangers, that's on
They
Amazon.
wrote a book called Do This for Love, which
Yes.
is also more information a bit about that
Mm,
Mosul experience with the
mm,
history. And
mm.
that was a real gift too.
Yeah, excellent. So for those of you listening, please check out those sources and those sites. You'll be amazed and learn a ton. Karen, you've been so kind to give this time. So thank you for everything you've shared.
Thank you.